Okay, we're live. Great. Welcome, everybody, and welcome, Thomas. Very happy to have you here. So, just a very brief introduction. Today, I'm talking to Thomas Eichenberger. He's the head of business units and executive board member at Sygnum Bank. And very excited to have you here, Thomas. Maybe before we dive into the deeper questions, maybe you can say a few words about who is Thomas.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Daniel, for the kind invitation. It's a pleasure to be here today. Yeah, my name is Thomas. I'm head of business units at Sygnum Bank, which essentially means that I'm taking strategic and commercial responsibility for a variety of products and services that we extend here at Sygnum, ranging from custody to trading to credit and lending, tokenization, as well as crypto compliance and RegTech services. Previously, I was in strategy consulting with the Boston Consulting Group and Roland Berger, and have a background in quantitative finance or financial mathematics from University of Zurich and ETH. And I'm very much looking forward to sharing some thoughts with you today with Daniel.
Great, me too. All right, so let's dive right in, Thomas. I want to talk about you a little bit as a person, as a human being first, before we dive into business. So, if you had to sum up your essence in one word, what would that be and why?
I think that one word would be problem solver. I consider myself really a problem solver at heart, let's say. Obviously, problem solving is what I've been trained for at the Boston Consulting Group and Roland Berger and previously. But I really believe that problem solving is what I enjoy the most. And it's also, in my opinion, resolving problems and overcoming challenges is also probably the most rewarding type of activity. And especially now that I'm working in a startup, if I may consider Sygnum still as a startup, I think it's a very important element of my daily work that whenever there is a challenge, be it in whatever dimension of the company, I try to come up with solutions, which then obviously, if they make sense, we also implement together with the team.
Tell me a bit more about problem solving. What is it really that that gets you about problem solving? What is problem solving to you that you're so excited about it and that it gives you so much? What is it about problem solving?
Well, I think there are so many things on a daily basis that come up where people feel, okay, we are somehow running against a wall or there's something in our way. It can be really in any sort of dimension. That's also why I believe it is so rewarding because it's not a particular discipline, but it's rather a skill to identify a challenge, to break it down into sub problems, and then think through how you can solve it, right, in various dimensions. And then obviously also talk to the team, right? Understand where the problem is coming from, what measures can be taken, what the best options are, outline these options, and then decide. And then, most importantly, also implement the solutions, right? It's not only about deriving solutions. That's probably what I did when I was still a consultant, right? You came up with a lot of interesting solutions, but then you gave it to someone else to decide upon it and implement it. And here it's really kind of the end-to-end journey, right? From identifying the problem, structuring it, coming up with options how to solve it, and then taking a decision and then implementing it together with the team. So I think it also involves obviously a lot of thinking, but it involves also a lot of talking to other stakeholders, gathering opinions and understanding different perspectives, and then coming up with that solution that makes most sense because it's most feasible, it's the smartest, or it's the fastest. May also take into consideration the consideration different elements that are driving the solution. So from that perspective, I think it's very exciting. It also triggers, I think, an instinct in me to resolve such problems, and it also ultimately helps us move forward, right? Which is, I think, especially in our environment, it's the most important element that we continuously move forward, and we are not being blocked by anything that comes into our way.
Thanks for the details. I really love the nuances about that. Now, you're a very passionate guy, if I may say so. And I'm curious where that passion comes from. And my question really there is like, you know, what's the reason that you get up every morning? What's driving you to do the work you do every day? What is sort of like your motivation, or what's rooted in your motivation every day?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I just said, right? I think now every day when I get up, I think at the end of the day, whatever happens during the day, at the end we will have advanced one further step forward, right? Could be one day it's only a baby step, right? You only overcame a tiny problem on the way, and on other days it may be that you're making a bigger step. But ultimately, what gets me up is really the fact that I believe that I, together with the team, can create impact every single day, right? And that was to me also very important when I made the choice to join Sygnum and leave consulting. I wanted to really have impact more or less on a daily basis, very tangible feedback as to whether the things that we are coming up really work out and we see an impact with clients and partners and others, or whether we don't see any impact and whether we have to change things. So ultimately for me it's really about being able to create impact on a daily basis.
Talk to me more about impact. What is impact to you? Like what, how does that look like to you and feel like to you? What is it? What is impact?
Well, impact to me really means being able to move forward, right? Seeing progress. And again, it can be on 100 different dimensions, right? It can be on the people dimension by bringing in new people into the organization, make the organization move faster by working more smoothly together. It can be in the dimension of products, right? Having a new product idea or figuring out the details of a new product that we aim to launch, or it can be on, I don't know, launching the Sygnum hub in the metaverse, right? Where you try to find new ways how we interact with clients and how we also show our pioneering spirit at Sygnum. I think it can be 100 things, right? But ultimately, it's about progress. It's about making sure that whatever comes in our way, we are able to eliminate it and we are able to move on as an organization. That's what I consider impact, right? Changing the status quo and not standing still.
Thanks for sharing. Jumping into status quo. I'm curious about status quo, but also more really about the future and where you see the future is going. So talk to me a little bit now. Let's focus a bit more on the crypto space. I'm super interested to hear your perspective there. What do you see as a status quo today, and where do you see the future going in your specific area?
Well, that's probably the billion-dollar question, right? Where the space will move into. Obviously, if I had that crystal ball that would tell us where the space is moving, I think we could align the Sygnum strategy, and then we would know that it would all work out, and we would become an even bigger success than we are today. But let me still share a few thoughts. I think currently, if you look at the landscape, there's quite a bit of a gap between, let's say, the regulated players such as Sygnum, who is a licensed bank here in Switzerland and holds a number of licenses also in Singapore by the local regulator there. And then there are a number of other players out there, unregulated ones, but providing centralized products and services, but then also all these projects in the space who provide decentralized services. So I feel at the moment there is quite a gap, and we will see that gap closing one way or the other. I feel that obviously one trend that we're already observing is that some of these centralized players who are currently unregulated, such as the Coinbases and Binances of this world, they start trying to obtain more and more licenses in also quite advanced and renowned jurisdictions, such as Switzerland or Singapore. In Switzerland, we haven't seen such big player obtaining a license yet, but in Singapore and other jurisdictions, also the Middle East, I think we have seen such players obtaining licenses. Obviously, that will put some pressure also on us, I guess, given that unique value proposition of being a fully regulated institution in that space may be at risk, right, compared to those players. And then I think the other element is then how do we properly and efficiently embed these unregulated DeFi players into the space? Because I think the technology that decentralized applications such as decentralized lending pools and the likes offer are super exciting and interesting, but I don't think at the same time that um, that we will see any such players trying to get regulatory licenses, some of which are not even organized as such that they could file for a license in any jurisdiction, right? So there, I think it will be quite interesting to see as to whether regulated players such as Sygnum will be able to grab that opportunity and make use of such technology, but in a fully regulated and fully compliant environment, right, where all the participants in such a decentralized lending pool are properly screened from a KYC, so know your customer, and AML, anti-money laundering point of view. Because ultimately, I think the use cases are super exciting. Technology is great. It can facilitate many things, eliminate intermediaries that are not necessarily relevant to extend such use cases. However, where we cannot compromise is on the regulatory aspects around money laundering and terrorist financing. And there, I think it will be up to players such as Sygnum to close that gap. And I'm very much looking forward to also working closely with such decentralized finance players and projects to see and explore how we can make use of their great technology in a fully regulated environment.
Interesting perspective. Thanks for sharing, Thomas. So you really think that things will more and more converge in the future, and these gaps will close between the different, approaches and the different ways that people and companies take today. Very interesting perspective.
I
Thanks for
hope so.
sharing.
I hope so. I also think, at the moment, we also don't necessarily see a level playing field, right? Sometimes we feel like we are privileged, obviously, to be regulated because we can convey that message of being a compliant, well-governed, properly risk-managed player in the field. At the same time, we have to work very closely with the regulator whenever it comes to launching a new product or service. Whereas others around us, you feel like they are launching a new token, a new product, a new service every other day, and no one is really stopping them from doing so, right? Even if they may not have the right risk management frameworks and procedures in place, right? So I think that convergence will help obviously also create a better level playing field for everyone. But more importantly, I feel also the integration of these decentralized applications and use cases into the regulated space will also make what we do much more efficient for everyone. So the terms that are currently being used more and more, I think, are centralized, decentralized finance, or institutional DeFi and the likes. And I hope that we will see much more of that in the future. And I hope that Sygnum will play a crucial role in shaping these terms and the products and services that come with it.
Cool. Thanks for sharing, Thomas. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about this field, which is very, very dynamic and ever changing and fast changing and overnight changing. In such an environment where things happen very fast and very dynamic, how do you stay relevant to customers? How do you stay at the pulse of the market?
Well, it's not easy, especially I think in our world of digital assets, DLT, Web3. Probably the world is even moving faster than anywhere else. I think sometimes I also personally feel that I'm way behind, right? That I simply cannot catch up with everything that is happening around me. Obviously, it helps that we have a full team of more than 200 employees now at Sygnum that are continuously monitoring the market, trying to anticipate and identify trends and industry developments. And we have also an agile organization in the background who can then adapt to such trends and developments and deliver solutions that solve customer needs and pain points. But sometimes it feels like it's impossible in our space to keep up with all the developments around us. And sometimes it's also good. I think if we tried to catch up with everything, we would be jumping from A to B to C to Y all the time, which I think doesn't also bring a sufficient level of stability and robustness into the team. So sometimes I'm glad we cannot jump on everything, because otherwise I think we would be even more stretched than we already are today with the types of products and services that we are trying to cover at the moment. But ultimately, it comes down to really having a team where everyone is intrinsically motivated to follow the markets. We also do have an informal chat with all team members where everyone posts the latest and greatest news, and whoever has time will pick it up. And if it is of relevance to us or particular relevance to us, obviously will be picked up and then will be worked on or assessed first and then worked on if it makes sense for us to play in the field.
Thanks for sharing. So one key aspect you say is basically also the focus, right? Focus on the core aspect and not just try to be involved in everything and everything new that pops up. And um, very interesting. I'm actually going to jump to a question from the audience. We just got a comment from somebody. The question is, do you believe that the current barriers like cost, time, effort to regulatory approval in Switzerland are appropriately set to foster innovation in the DeFi space locally here in Switzerland?
Whether I feel the barriers are not too high, right? Is that the essence of the question?
I think, yeah. Do you believe that the current market barriers approval are appropriate to foster
Yes.
the innovation in the DeFi space?
Well, I think generally we are in a lucky situation that I think the regulator here in Switzerland is quite forward-looking and is quite the environment is quite favorable for companies such as Sygnum and others who are taking the regulatory road or route here in Switzerland when it comes to extending the products and services around digital assets. Now on DeFi, that's not an easy one, right? Because as I said before, especially when it comes to trying to operate completely decentralized applications, where you can basically just connect with your wallet and no one knows who is behind, etc. I mean, that's I think probably in full contradiction to the essence of regulatory frameworks such as KYC, know your customer, and AML, anti-money laundering. So there, I think from a regulatory perspective, I think the concerns that regulators have are very reasonable, and I think everyone can understand why they have it, which is exactly why I believe we need to try to find ways such that regulated institutions, such as ourselves, who understand those regulatory frameworks and have learned how to play by the rules and how to make sure we can still use such technology, but without compromising on the most relevant regulatory frameworks, that we really bring these two worlds together. So from that perspective, generally, I think regulatory framework here in Switzerland and how it is being implemented and how we are also overseen is very appropriate, very adequate. And I think we can be glad that we have such an environment here in Switzerland that allows us to create such companies and products and solutions in a fully regulated environment.
Thanks for sharing, Thomas. I'll just jump in. If there are other questions, I'll just jump into the chat afterwards. But I have one more question about differentiation. So there's several players who probably don't do the same thing that you do, but there's more and more competition in that space. From the bigger banks as well, or like from traditional banks, but as well as from crypto banks. And I'm just curious, what do you feel really differentiates you, or how do you differentiate yourself in the market?
Yeah, a good question. I mean, it depends a bit on whom you're comparing us with from a peer group perspective, right? Obviously, because one big element of differentiation still is our regulatory status as a fully licensed Swiss bank, right? We don't have a fintech license or anything similar. We really do have a proper Swiss banking license. So very few can say that when it comes to dealing in digital assets in particular. But beyond that, I believe what differentiates us also is obviously one element is our pioneering spirit, right? We don't necessarily want to only focus on, let's say, the most standard products and services that you could extend. So we don't stop at custody and trading and Lombard lending, but we go a step further, right? We try to innovate the space. We have done a lot of things on the tokenization side. We're the first bank globally to issue a Swiss franc stablecoin. We also build a lot of technology solutions ourselves, but I come to that at the later stage. Again, we have been the first who launched a hub in the metaverse. We have done many things where we have tried to be pioneers. We've just recently launched an NFT platform, the first compliant institutional grade NFT platform operated by a bank. So I think we're trying to be pioneers in the space, both within, let's say, what you could consider the core banking services for digital assets, but also then the adjacent compliant products and services that we try to extend. And I think the last element is really that we consider ourselves not necessarily only a bank, but rather a tech company with a banking license. So we have a lot of developers in-house, ranging across software engineering, blockchain engineering, site reliability engineering, and so on, who develop products and applications for our clients here in-house at Sygnum. So we don't rely on putting together third-party solutions in order to extend our products and services, but we build stuff ourselves. So we were, for instance, the first bank in July last year who offered an ETH2, or these days just an Ethereum staking service. And that's how we also try to differentiate ourselves, right? By building, again, anticipating certain developments in the market, but then also being able of building technology solutions in-house to address such pain points or needs that we see with our clients.
Thanks for sharing. I mean, it's really interesting that you mentioned the pioneering spirit. It almost feels like it's an overarching roof, the pioneering spirit, and then all these things, are underneath, with all the innovations and, also like a tech company with a banking license and all these things, right? They fit very well, I feel, under this pioneering roof with Sygnum. Really appreciate that sharing. Thank you. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about digital products, digital services, digital offerings in general. What do you believe makes digital products, services, digital offerings successful? What do you feel is sort of the core ingredient that is needed?
Yeah, I mean, knowing that you work for Ginetta, that's probably not what I should say first, but I think for me, ultimately, the underlying product or service needs to be relevant, right? It needs to the product or service itself needs to have a purpose and needs to address a pain point or a client need very directly. But then obviously once that is given, I think having a good customer experience or user experience is also equally important, right? Because if it's too cumbersome to use that product or service, you'll still lose probably more than 50%, or you have probably better stats than I do. But my gut feeling would tell me you would still lose like 50 or even more percent of the customers who would be initially triggered to use the product, but after finding out that it is too cumbersome, they would still give up and try to see whether there is someone else out there in the market who offers something similar, but with a much better customer user experience. So yeah, it's two things. The product or service itself needs to solve a need, but then obviously it has to be extended in a way such that it is appealing for customers to use it.
Thanks for sharing. And since we're covering the whole journey from the product market fit all over the user experience at Ginetta, you didn't really start at the wrong place.
Okay, I'm glad. I'm glad.
Let's talk a little bit more, or I'm just curious about when it comes to innovation, I feel sometimes it's an interesting dynamic that happens between the people who are driving the innovation in the company, who are actively want to innovate, who want to try out things and go different roads, and then sort of like the sponsors or like the management or sometimes the board of the company, where maybe they sometimes are looking at different metrics, for example, or they're looking at different ways of measuring how are we making progress. So my question there is, like, how do you get management buy-in or board buy-in when it comes to innovation? Like, how do you deal with those dynamics that are maybe a little bit different than selling 20% more of an existing product that is already successful? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, luckily, innovation and being a pioneer has been part of Sygnum's DNA from the very beginning, right? As already touched upon previously. So the company was founded to innovate, right? That's probably differentiates us also quite a bit already compared to incumbent players or traditional banks or insurance companies who have been in the field for a very long period of time and have been working on a very solid and established business model, and now kind of the innovation part is something new to the organization. Whereas for us, it has always been there. And many team members also, including board members, I'd say, also only joined the company because we set ourselves up to innovate the space and disrupt the space. So I think generally it might be a bit easier for us to get buy-in for innovation. However, we also obviously have often the discussions how much innovation also our organization can absorb, right? How many things can we do in parallel, and whether we should not increase focus on delivering less things in the same period of time or with the same amount of resources. But in my view, in the end, that's also the answer, I think, to the question, right? How much innovation can you drive, and also how can you get buy-in in order to deliver that innovation? In my view, it's a matter of proper resource allocation, and it's a matter of proper road mapping. While still working in a fully agile model, I think still road mapping is a very important tool, right? That you don't try to do everything in parallel and trying to stretch the organization across 100 topics, but that you focus on a number of initiatives at a particular point in time or during a particular time window, and then you conduct smart sequencing, which may be then much more impactful and also much more productive than trying to do everything in parallel. And obviously, ultimately, innovation in the best case scenario, it has as a positive business case with short return on investment cycles. But sometimes innovation is also a tool to shape your company's DNA, right? To shape your value proposition, to shape your brand, to shape the public perception. So, and I think, especially with a company like ours, we shouldn't underestimate those elements that innovation brings and has brought to the company so far.
Thanks for sharing. Yes, I thought if I want to ask that question to you specifically, because it's a different dynamic, but I was still curious to hear what you had to say. And yeah, of course, it's different from a traditional company for sure. But I think what you said applies also in the traditional context a lot. When it comes to the question of how much innovation can you actually, how much should you do in terms of balancing. Actually, at some point you have to make money, right? At some point you have to pay salaries. At some point you have to deliver and create value in the marketplace that actually people are using and paying for and everything. I want to talk a little bit more about your journey so far at Sygnum. If you look back at the journey you had so far at Sygnum, what would you say is one of the biggest lessons that you have learned so far?
Yeah, for me, it's quite clear, and that's also what I tell everyone in my close network, friends, and whomever I discuss it. I think for me, it really boils down to having the right people and team, right? I think you can have the best idea. If you don't manage to bring the right people and team together, you might still fail at realizing the idea and bringing it to success. I would not necessarily want to say that you can have the worst idea and still bring it to success if you have the right team, but it goes a bit in that direction, right? You don't necessarily have to have the very best idea, but if you manage to have a great team, you can also start with an idea, let's say, of medium quality, and then the team will obviously help each other to make it a much better idea over time, and then most importantly also realize the idea and bring it to success. So I think being able to have the right people and have the right team in place also for the right stages of a company's evolution, I think is really crucial in bringing a company or a startup then to fruition. So I think that's for me really the biggest learning. How can you manage to bring the right team together to also then keep it together over a certain period of time to ensure continuity? And then I think, yeah, bringing it to a success. I think that's the biggest lesson learned I had so far.
Why is this balance like that? I mean, it's something that, of course, in the startup space or in general, is quite clear. And, this is what you can read in books and everywhere that, the idea is sort of like secondary. The team is always first, right? It's also very often when it comes to investors, what's been considered on a higher maybe priority level. But why is it? Why is it like that? Why is the idea maybe secondary and the team primary? What makes that dynamic work that way?
Yeah, well, because I think ultimately there's so much uncertainty around the realization of an idea, right? You may have the best idea, but I'm sure that you haven't thought through all the different elements of what is needed then in order to make that idea a success. So ultimately, you have to have a team that can still work around whatever challenge may come up over the course of the implementation of an idea. So I think that's one aspect, and the other aspect is also that you spend, I mean, that doesn't only apply to startup companies. I think that applies to every organization, but you spend so much time together on a daily basis with us, maybe not only daily, but also sometimes in the evenings and nights and weekends. But ultimately, yeah, there you spend so much time together. So there's a lot of coherence needed across the team. There's also a bit of personal fondness needed across the team. And there is also it's also needed that you bring different subject matter expertises together, but that is still ensured that people can still speak the same language, because ultimately there are different individuals with different backgrounds and different fields of expertise, but in the end you still need to be able to communicate in a way such that everyone understands. And I think that's why probably it is so important, because you spend so much time together, you're facing obstacles that you can only solve jointly and only if you speak the same language. Um, that I think is are the elements that are important for me. Why I believe a team is so important.
Thanks for sharing the details. I mean, it's really interesting also to see that in context with idea and execution, because an idea is almost like a fixed thing in time where, it's just a thought, right? It's just something, that we
Yes,
think of, but then the team and the execution is something that happens over time and is able to shape and adjust and, change and therefore, I guess, with the team, if it has the right ingredients,
yes,
it can manage that process versus the thought or the idea as a thing. It's
exactly.
yeah, really interesting. There's one more question I have, Thomas. That's the last one for today.
Okay.
um, let's think ways into the future. Let's say you're 80 years old and and you're looking back at your life and you see how the world has changed and everything that has happened. When you're at that moment in time in the future, looking back, what is a change by then that you really want to see in the world?
Wow, that's a difficult one. I assume you're asking that everyone, so I also have to answer it, right? Well, I think first of all, obviously, I wish that we would have gotten by then some of our current challenges or global challenges under control, such as the climate change, such as the ever increasing gap between the rich and the poor, etc. But maybe in a bit smaller terms, I think I would hope that society would have moved to a state back again where we are a bit more humble, a bit more grateful for what we have, and that all of us also actively contribute to preserving the things that we have today. I feel sometimes we are currently, yeah, not necessarily acting very much along these lines and principles and values as much as we have done before, or as much as the generations before us have done so. So I would really love to see a bit of a trend into that direction again, right, where we appreciate the things more that we have, that we are a bit more humble, a bit more grateful, and that all of us try to actively contribute to preserving that state. Obviously, not in terms of standing still again and just trying to keep the status quo, but still trying to contribute to yeah, a society where we all feel comfortable in, and we all can live along each other in a very good way.
Thanks for sharing, Thomas. Yes, I'm asking that question to everyone, but it's always a different answer, and I love that. And it's a little bit more. It's like starting with the very depth of somebody's personality, and then ending on the same note. It sort of like closes the loop. Thank you, Thomas. It was really really nice talking to you today. Of course, the recording is going to be available for people to watch later. And yeah, Thomas, thank you so much. Let's just
Thanks
see,
a
there's
lot.
one more comment. That's not a question, it's just a comment um, in the chat. But Thomas, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it and wish you a great afternoon.
Thanks a lot for the invitation, Daniel. Thanks everyone for listening in. Have a great afternoon.